The clock on Cameron Cross's corner office wall read 2:47 a.m., but time had lost all meaning hours ago. The panoramic view of Silicon Valley stretched endlessly before him through floor-to-ceiling windows, a constellation of lights marking the empire he'd built from nothing. But tonight, those lights seemed to mock him. His fingers moved across the holographic keyboard with practiced precision, green lines of code reflecting in his sharp green eyes. At 32, Cameron had revolutionized cybersecurity, turned Cross Innovations into a fortress that protected the digital lives of millions. His algorithms were legendary. His firewalls were impenetrable. His reputation was built on one simple promise: nothing gets through that he doesn't allow. Until tonight. The infiltration had been so elegant, so perfectly executed, that he almost admired it. Almost. Someone had not only bypassed his legendary security systems but had left behind something that made his pulse quicken in ways he didn't understand. Not malicious code designed to steal or destroy, but something else entirely. Something that felt like a challenge wrapped in silk, a digital fingerprint that whispered of intelligence so brilliant it took his breath away. Cameron leaned back in his leather chair, running his hands through his dark hair as he studied the intruder's work. The code was poetry in motion, each line crafted with the kind of artistic precision that came from someone who didn't just understand programming, they lived it, breathed it, made love to it with every keystroke. Whoever had done this wasn't trying to hurt his company. They were trying to improve it. And that realization sent electricity shooting down his spine. The subtle scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the determination that had carried him through countless all-nighters, but tonight felt different. Tonight, someone had touched his digital soul and left him wanting more. The cool blue glow of his monitors painted shadows across his angular features, highlighting the intensity that had built his empire and the vulnerability he'd spent years hiding. As he traced the elegant intrusion through his systems, one thought consumed him. Who was skilled enough to make him feel so completely, utterly outmatched? Have you ever met someone whose mind was so brilliant it became your greatest weakness? Stay with me as I share the story of how the most secure man in tech discovered that the most dangerous virus doesn't attack computers, it attacks hearts that thought they were unhackable. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. But to understand how Cameron Cross, the man who had algorithms for everything, found his carefully calculated world turned upside down, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to understand the fortress he'd built around his heart, and the brilliant woman who would prove that some walls are meant to be broken. Cameron's penthouse apartment reflected his personality perfectly: minimalist, controlled, efficient. Everything had its place, from the smart home system that responded to his voice to the coffee machine that brewed his morning espresso exactly 4 minutes before his alarm. At 6 a.m. sharp, his day began with the same routine that had carried him through 5 years of building Cross Innovations into a tech empire. But this morning, as he stood in his marble shower letting the hot water wash away the exhaustion of another sleepless night, his mind wasn't on quarterly reports or board meetings. It was on lines of code that danced through his memory like music, on the elegant signature left by someone who had seen through his defenses as if they were made of glass. "Sir, you have a board meeting in 90 minutes, his AI assistant reminded him as he stepped into his walk-in closet. The array of perfectly pressed suits hung like armor, each one chosen to project the image of untouchable success. Today he selected charcoal gray, a color that matched his mood and complemented the storm clouds gathering outside his windows. Cross Innovations occupied 3 floors of the most prestigious building in Palo Alto, its sleek glass and steel design reflecting Cameron's vision of technological perfection. As his private elevator carried him to the executive floor, he watched employees through the glass walls, brilliant minds he'd handpicked, each one loyal to the company that had given them purpose and extraordinary compensation. "Morning, boss," Lucas Turner's voice carried the easy confidence of a man who'd stood by Cameron's side since the early days. As head of security, Lucas was one of the few people who could read Cameron's moods, and this morning he definitely sensed something was off. Rough night? Cameron paused in the reception area of his office suite, studying his oldest friend. Lucas had the build of a former military man and the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent his career protecting things that mattered. More importantly, he had the loyalty that money couldn't buy and the honesty Cameron needed even when he didn't want to hear it. "Someone breached our perimeter," Cameron said quietly, knowing that Lucas would understand the gravity of those words. Cross-innovation security was Lucas's domain, his pride and passion. Lucas's expression darkened. How deep did they get? What did they take? That's just it. Cameron moved toward his office, expecting Lucas to follow. They didn't take anything. They left something behind. Code that's. He struggled to find words that wouldn't sound insane. Beautiful. The boardroom filled with the usual suspects, investors, department heads, and his mother, Julia Cross, whose presence always added an extra layer of complexity to any meeting. At 58, Julia commanded respect through sheer force of will and the kind of old-money elegance that opened doors Cameron's technical brilliance couldn't touch. She'd been instrumental in securing the early funding that built Cross Innovations, and her business instincts had saved them more than once. "Cameron, you look tired," Julia observed as he took his seat at the head of the polished conference table. Her concern was genuine but wrapped in the kind of maternal authority that still made him feel like a teenager sometimes. "I'm fine, Mother." The formality was intentional, a boundary that kept their personal relationship separate from business. Let's begin. The quarterly reports painted a picture of continued success, revenue up 18%, client satisfaction at an all-time high, employee retention rates that made competitors jealous. But as the CFO droned through financial projections, Cameron's mind wandered to the elegant intrusion that had kept him awake. Who was she? Because somehow he knew it was a woman, knew it with the same certainty that told him when code was about to crash. Cameron? Julia's voice cut through his distraction. The security audit results? He straightened, forcing his attention back to the room full of people who depended on his leadership. "Lucas, you want to take this one?" Lucas stood, his presentation precise and reassuring. Cross-innovation security was state-of-the-art, their client data protected by layers of encryption that would take quantum computers decades to crack. As he spoke, Cameron found himself thinking about the intrusion again. The hacker hadn't tried to crack anything. They'd simply walked through his defenses like they'd been invited. After the meeting, as the boardroom emptied, Julia lingered. She had that look in her eyes that Cameron had learned to both appreciate and fear, the one that meant she was about to say something he needed to hear but didn't want to. "You're distracted," she said, moving to the window that overlooked the company's main floor. "That's not like you." Cameron joined her, watching their employees through the glass. Young programmers hunched over multiple monitors, sales teams celebrating closed deals, the steady hum of innovation that never stopped. Just thinking about the future. Or thinking about why someone would want to test our security. Julia's reflection in the window met his eyes. Lucas mentioned the breach. "Are we in danger?" "No," Cameron said, and he meant it. Whatever the hacker's purpose, destroying cross-innovations wasn't it. But someone's trying to tell us something. I just need to figure out what. Julia studied him with the intensity that had made her a formidable businesswoman. "Be careful, son. Not everyone who approaches us has pure motives. Your success makes you a target in ways you don't always consider." That evening, as Cameron finally left his office, he passed the frosted glass doors of the smaller firms that shared their building. One caught his attention, a simple sign that read Wilson Security Consulting. He'd noticed it before but never given it much thought. Tonight, something made him pause. Through the glass, he could see the silhouette of someone working late, fingers flying across a keyboard with the same intensity he recognized in himself. For a moment, he considered knocking, introducing himself, satisfying the curiosity that had been building all day. Instead, he walked on, not knowing that behind that frosted glass sat the woman who would change everything. Meanwhile, 15 miles away in a converted garage that served as both home office and sanctuary, Kimberly Wilson sat surrounded by monitors that would make most tech companies jealous. At 29, she'd built a reputation as one of the most skilled ethical hackers on the West Coast, someone companies called when they needed to find vulnerabilities before the bad guys did. But tonight's work wasn't about finding weaknesses. It was about proving a point. "Daddy, you were right," she murmured to the empty room, her voice carrying the slight musical accent inherited from her grandmother's Louisiana roots. Dr. Malik Wilson had raised his daughter to believe that intelligence was a responsibility, that those with the power to protect others had an obligation to do so. Tonight, she'd used that intelligence to expose what she believed was corporate hypocrisy of the highest order. The anonymous tip had arrived 3 weeks ago, evidence that Cross Innovations, the company that built its reputation on protecting user privacy, was secretly collecting and selling personal data. The documentation had been convincing, the source apparently credible. What Kimberly discovered during her investigation, however, was something entirely different. Cameron Cross's security systems weren't hiding unethical data collection. They were protecting user information with a level of sophistication and genuine care that surprised her. His algorithms weren't designed to exploit vulnerabilities, they were created to eliminate them. And the man himself, based on the elegant code she'd discovered, possessed the kind of principled intelligence that made her heart beat faster. Which created a problem she hadn't anticipated. "Kim, you've been staring at that screen for 6 hours straight," Aisha Hurst called from the kitchen where she was making her famous midnight coffee. As Kimberly's best friend and business partner, Aisha had the privilege of walking into Kim's space whenever she wanted, usually bearing caffeine and common sense in equal measure. Aisha appeared in the doorway balancing 2 steaming mugs, her warm brown eyes taking in the chaos of monitors, notebooks, and the kind of technical equipment that most people couldn't identify. At 28, she shared Kimberly's passion for ethical hacking but possessed the practical wisdom that kept their small consulting firm profitable and legal. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Aisha settled into the worn leather chair that served as the office's only comfortable seating, pushing aside a stack of technical manuals. Kimberly accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma before answering. "I found something, but not what I expected." She gestured at the main monitor where lines of Cameron's code still glowed. "Look at this architecture. It's not just secure, it's elegant. Whoever wrote this wasn't just thinking about function. They were thinking about art." "Art doesn't pay the bills, honey." "What about the data collection allegations?" "False." Kimberly's fingers moved across her keyboard, pulling up the evidence she'd compiled. "Someone fed me bad information. Cross Innovations isn't collecting user data illegally. They're protecting it better than most government agencies." Aisha raised an eyebrow. So the anonymous tip was wrong? Or deliberately misleading? Kimberly had spent the last 3 days tracing the source of the original allegations, following digital breadcrumbs that led to shell companies and encrypted communications. "Someone wanted me to believe Cameron Cross was a villain. The question is why? Maybe because he's not as untouchable as he seems?" Aisha suggested, her voice carrying the kind of insight that made her invaluable as both friend and business partner. "Rich, powerful, gorgeous, and brilliant. Someone probably wants to take him down just because he exists." Kimberly felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Gorgeous? I've never met the man." "Honey, you've been researching him for weeks. Don't tell me you haven't looked up his pictures." Aisha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't buying the innocent act. 6'2", dark hair, green eyes, and a smile that could probably convince Congress to fund his personal space program. Plus, the man's a genius who built a multi-billion-dollar company from nothing. That's attractive in ways that have nothing to do with looks. My job is to assess security vulnerabilities, not rate the attractiveness of CEOs, Kimberly said, but her protest lacked conviction. The truth was, she had looked up Cameron Cross's photos multiple times. And each time, she'd been struck by the intensity in his eyes, the controlled confidence in his posture, the sense that he was always thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Aisha's skepticism was palpable. So what's your next move? You've proven the allegations are false. Case closed? Kimberly stared at the monitor, where Cameron's code continued to fascinate her with its combination of technical brilliance and unexpected artistry. I think I need to tell him what I found. Someone's trying to damage his reputation, and he deserves to know. You mean you want to meet him? I mean I want to do the right thing. But even as she said it, Kimberly couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation at the thought of finally meeting the man whose digital fingerprints had been haunting her dreams. What happens when 2 brilliant minds are destined to collide? Share in the comments if you've ever felt that electric moment when you knew someone was about to change everything. Your stories inspire our community. The Global Tech Innovation Conference happened every year in San Francisco, drawing the brightest minds in technology for 3 days of presentations, networking, and the kind of intellectual sparring that Kimberly usually avoided. But this year was different. This year, Cameron Cross was delivering the opening keynote on the future of ethical AI, and she needed to be there. She'd registered using her legitimate credentials, Kimberly Wilson, Wilson Security Consulting, rather than the false identity she'd used during her investigation. Tonight, for the first time in weeks, she would be entirely honest about who she was and why she was there. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. You nervous? Dar. Malik Wilson's voice carried the warmth and wisdom that had guided Kimberly through every major decision in her life. At 62, her father possessed the kind of intellectual authority that came from decades of teaching computer science at Stanford and watching technology evolve from academic curiosity to world-changing force. They sat in his office, which looked exactly like what central casting would order for distinguished professor. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, papers scattered across an antique desk, the lingering scent of pipe tobacco and old leather. The only concession to modernity was the sleek laptop that seemed almost out of place among the vintage academic atmosphere. Should I be nervous? Kimberly asked, accepting the tea he'd prepared according to the ritual they'd shared since she was a child. You're about to confront one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley and tell him that someone's been lying about his company. Dr. Wilson's eyes held the mixture of pride and concern that had shaped Kimberly's understanding of right and wrong. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious features into something approaching mischievous. But your grandmother always said that doing the right thing is rarely the easy thing. And you've never chosen easy. Kimberly thought about her grandmother, the woman who'd taught her that intelligence without integrity was just cleverness, and cleverness without purpose was just showing off. What if he doesn't believe me? What if he thinks I'm trying to manipulate him somehow? Then you'll have learned something important about his character, Dr. Wilson said. But from what you've told me about his code, about the ethical safeguards built into his systems, I suspect Cameron Cross is someone who recognizes truth when he hears it. That morning, as Kimberly prepared for the conference, she found herself standing in front of her closet longer than usual. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of jeans, t-shirts, and the occasional blazer for client meetings. Today felt different. Today required something that projected confidence and competence without looking like she was trying too hard. She settled on dark slacks, a silk blouse the color of forest shadows, and a jacket that made her feel like she could conquer the world. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, hung loose around her shoulders. The effect was professional but approachable, confident but not intimidating. Perfect, Aisha announced from the doorway. You look like someone who could run a Fortune 500 company or hack into one with equal ease. I'm not trying to impress anyone, Kimberly protested, but her reflection in the mirror suggested otherwise. Right. You just happened to choose your best outfit for a random Tuesday at a tech conference. Aisha's knowing smile followed Kimberly as she gathered her laptop bag and conference materials. Just remember. You're brilliant, you're ethical, and you're about to do something that could protect his company and his reputation. If he can't appreciate that, he's not worthy of the intellectual crush you've been developing. I don't have a crush. Honey, you've been quoting his code like poetry. If that's not a crush, I don't know what is. The Moscone Center buzzed with the energy that only came when thousands of the world's brightest minds gathered in one place. Kimberly had attended smaller conferences before, but nothing prepared her for the sheer scale of this event. Massive screens displayed company logos and presentation schedules, while attendees wearing everything from startup t-shirts to corporate suits navigated the maze of exhibition booths and presentation halls. She found herself gravitating toward the main auditorium where Cameron would speak in less than an hour. The space was already filling with people eager to hear from the man who'd revolutionized cybersecurity and made personal privacy his company's mission. Kimberly chose a seat in the middle section, close enough to see his expressions, far enough back to avoid standing out. As she waited, she reviewed her approach one more time. She would listen to his presentation, approach him during the Q&A if possible, and request a private meeting to discuss what she discovered. Simple, straightforward, professional. The plan was perfect except for one problem: she had no idea how seeing Cameron Cross in person would affect her ability to think clearly. When he walked onto the stage, the entire auditorium seemed to exhale collectively. Photos hadn't done him justice. Cameron possessed the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it, moving with the controlled confidence of someone who'd earned his position through merit rather than inheritance. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccable, but it was his eyes that captured her attention, intelligent green eyes that seemed to take in everything and reveal nothing. Good morning, his voice carried easily through the auditorium, warm but authoritative. 5 years ago, I stood on a stage much like this and promised that Cross Innovations would never compromise user privacy for profit. Today, I want to talk about why that promise isn't just good business, it's a moral imperative that should define our entire industry. For the next 45 minutes, Kimberly listened to Cameron articulate a vision of technology that served humanity rather than exploiting it. He spoke about algorithms designed to protect rather than manipulate, about the responsibility that came with access to personal data, about building systems that enhanced human dignity rather than undermining it. Every word confirmed what she'd discovered in his code. This was a man who believed that intelligence should serve justice. But it was more than his words that captivated her. It was the passion that animated his features when he talked about protecting children's online safety, the intensity that flashed in his eyes when he discussed holding tech companies accountable for their impact on society. This wasn't corporate theater designed to improve his company's image. This was a man sharing his genuine beliefs about how technology could create a better world. When he opened the floor for questions, Kimberly found herself rising before she'd consciously decided to speak. The microphone appeared in her hands as if by magic, and suddenly hundreds of eyes were focused on her, including the pair of green ones that seemed to see straight through her. Kimberly Wilson, Wilson Security Consulting, she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. Your presentation is compelling, Mr. Cross, but rhetoric and reality don't always align. What concrete evidence can you provide that Cross Innovations practices the ethical standards you advocate? How do we know your algorithms aren't secretly collecting data that could be used against the very people you claim to protect? The question was more aggressive than she'd intended, but it created the opening she needed. Cameron's expression sharpened with interest rather than defensiveness, and when he smiled, actually smiled, at her challenge, she felt her heart skip several beats. An excellent question, Ms. Wilson, he said, and somehow he made her name sound like music. And one that deserves more than corporate platitudes in response. Chapter 2. For the next 10 minutes, Cameron Cross did something that surprised everyone in the auditorium, including himself. Instead of offering polished corporate responses, he pulled up actual code on the massive screens behind him. Line by line, he walked through the ethical safeguards built into cross-innovation systems, explaining how user data was encrypted, anonymized, and protected at every stage. As you can see, he said, highlighting a particularly elegant section of code, our algorithms are designed with privacy as the default, not the exception. Users own their data. We're simply the guardians. Kimberly found herself leaning forward, captivated by both his technical brilliance and his willingness to be transparent. Most CEOs would have deflected her question with marketing speak. Cameron was showing actual code to a room full of potential competitors. The move was either incredibly confident or slightly insane. But here's what I find interesting, Ms. Wilson. Cameron's voice carried a note that made her pulse quicken. Your question suggests you've done significant research into our practices. I'm curious about your methodology. The challenge in his tone was unmistakable, and Kimberly felt electricity shoot down her spine. He wasn't just answering her question. He was engaging in intellectual combat, and she'd never found anything more arousing. Public information analysis, third-party security assessments, and observation of user experience patterns, she responded, her voice gaining strength with each word. Though I must say, your willingness to show actual code suggests either admirable transparency or dangerous overconfidence. A ripple of laughter went through the auditorium, but Cameron's eyes never left hers. Perhaps both. Though I'd argue that true security comes from robust design, not obscurity. Agreed. But robust design means anticipating attacks that haven't been invented yet. How do you future-proof systems against threats you can't predict? Cameron paused, and Kimberly could see him genuinely considering her question rather than reaching for a prepared soundbite. By building systems that learn and adapt rather than simply defend. By assuming that any static security measure will eventually be compromised and designing flexibility into the foundation. Adaptive algorithms, Kimberly murmured, and something in her tone made Cameron's expression sharpen with recognition. Exactly. Though I suspect you already knew that. The tension between them was becoming obvious to everyone in the auditorium. What had started as a professional Q&A was beginning to feel like intellectual foreplay conducted in front of 1,000 witnesses. Kimberly could feel the attention of the crowd, but all she could focus on was the way Cameron's eyes seemed to see straight through her professional facade to something deeper. One final question, she said, and her voice had dropped to a more intimate register that somehow still carried through the silent auditorium. What would you do if you discovered that someone had tested your security measures without permission? Someone who found vulnerabilities you didn't know existed? Cameron was quiet for a long moment, and Kimberly could see the exact moment when understanding flickered across his features. His smile, when it came, was both knowing and appreciative. I'd want to meet them, he said, and the simple words carried enough heat to make her breath catch. I'd want to understand their methodology, their findings, and their intentions. Because anyone skilled enough to find flaws in our systems is someone we need either as an ally or a very well-monitored adversary. The applause that followed seemed to come from far away as Kimberly made her way back to her seat on unsteady legs. She'd intended to create an opening for a private conversation. Instead, she'd engaged in the most intellectually stimulating and sexually charged exchange of her life in front of a room full of strangers. As Cameron concluded his presentation and fielded a few more mundane questions, Kimberly found herself studying his every movement, every gesture, every subtle expression that crossed his face. She'd spent weeks analyzing his code, but seeing him in person revealed layers of complexity that algorithms couldn't capture. The way he moved suggested controlled power, like a predator who'd learned to mask his intensity behind civilized behavior. The way he spoke revealed genuine passion beneath corporate polish. And the way he'd looked at her during their exchange suggested he was every bit as intrigued by her as she was by him. When the presentation ended and the auditorium began to empty, Kimberly remained in her seat, uncertain whether to approach him or flee. The decision was made for her when she noticed Cameron moving through the crowd in her direction, his path deliberate and unwavering. "Ms. Wilson," he said as he reached her row, and the sound of her name in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. "I believe we have more to discuss than a public forum allows." Up close, he was even more imposing than he'd appeared on stage. Standing nearly 6.5 feet tall, he had the kind of presence that made everyone around him seem smaller and less significant. But it was his eyes that held her attention, intelligent green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance while revealing nothing of his own thoughts. "Mr. Cross," she managed, pleased that her voice remained steady despite the way her heart was pounding. "I appreciate you taking the time. Something tells me this conversation will be worth my time." He gestured toward the exit. "There's a coffee shop across the street that's usually quieter than the conference center. Would you join me?" As they walked through the bustling conference center, Kimberly was acutely aware of the attention their pairing drew. Cameron Cross was tech royalty, someone whose presence at any event generated buzz and speculation. Being seen leaving with him would undoubtedly fuel gossip about who she was and what their conversation might entail. "Having second thoughts?" Cameron asked, apparently noticing her discomfort with the stares they were attracting. "Just wondering if this is how you usually recruit security consultants," she replied, grateful when they stepped outside into the cool San Francisco morning. "I don't usually recruit anyone personally," Cameron admitted as they crossed the street. "But then, most security consultants don't challenge me to intellectual duels in front of 1,000 people." The coffee shop he'd chosen was a small, intimate place that managed to feel both modern and timeless. Exposed brick walls were lined with bookshelves, while soft jazz played over the conversations of what appeared to be mostly students and freelancers working on laptops. It was the kind of place where serious conversations could happen without interruption. Cameron chose a corner table that offered privacy while still allowing him to keep an eye on the room, a habit that Kimberly recognized from her own security training. As they settled into comfortable leather chairs with their coffee, she found herself studying his hands as he wrapped them around his mug. Long fingers, carefully maintained nails, no wedding ring. Everything about Cameron Cross suggested precision and control. "So," he said, those penetrating green eyes focusing on her with laser intensity. "Why don't you tell me about the vulnerabilities you found in our systems?" Kimberly had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but sitting across from Cameron in the intimate atmosphere of the coffee shop, her carefully planned words seemed inadequate. Instead, she found herself speaking from the heart. 3 weeks ago, I received an anonymous tip alleging that Cross Innovations was secretly collecting and selling user data," she began, watching his expression carefully for any sign of guilt or defensiveness. The documentation seemed credible, the source appeared legitimate. "I was hired to investigate." Cameron's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Hired by whom?" "That's still unclear. The payment came through shell companies and encrypted transfers. Very sophisticated, very untraceable." Kimberly leaned forward, her own intensity matching his. "But here's the thing, everything I was told about your company was false." Something shifted in Cameron's expression, tension giving way to curiosity. "Explain." "Your security systems aren't hiding unethical data collection. They're protecting user information with a level of sophistication that honestly surprised me. Your algorithms aren't designed to exploit vulnerabilities, they're created to eliminate them." Kimberly paused, choosing her next words carefully. "And your code is beautiful." The compliment seemed to catch Cameron off guard, and for a moment his carefully controlled facade slipped to reveal something much more vulnerable underneath. "You've been in our systems." It wasn't a question, and Kimberly didn't treat it as one. "Yes. But not in the way you're thinking. I didn't steal anything, didn't copy files, didn't plant malware. I studied your architecture, your security protocols, your data handling procedures. I wanted to understand how your systems actually work, not just how you claim they work. And what did you find? A company that actually practices what it preaches. Kimberly pulled out her laptop, opening it to show Cameron a detailed analysis she'd prepared. Look at this data flow diagram. Every decision point includes ethical considerations, user consent verification, privacy protection measures. This isn't window dressing for investors, this is foundational architecture. Cameron leaned closer to study her screen, and Kimberly caught the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated that suited his controlled intensity perfectly. Their proximity sent awareness shooting through her nervous system, making it difficult to concentrate on technical details. This level of analysis, Cameron said quietly, his voice carrying a note of admiration that made her pulse quicken. How long did it take you? 3 weeks of 16-hour days, Kimberly admitted. Your systems are, complex doesn't begin to describe it. Elegant, sophisticated, intuitive. Like digital poetry. When Cameron looked up from her laptop, their faces were only inches apart. Kimberly could see flecks of gold in his green eyes, could count the individual lashes that framed them, could feel the warmth of his breath as he spoke. You realize what this means, he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register that seemed to wrap around her like silk. That someone fed me false information to make me believe you were the villain, Kimberly whispered, acutely aware that they were leaning toward each other as if drawn by some invisible force. That someone wanted you to attack my company. Cameron's eyes dropped briefly to her lips before returning to meet her gaze. The question is why? The spell was broken by the arrival of their waitress asking if they needed refills, but the electricity that had sparked between them continued to hum just beneath the surface of their conversation. Kimberly sat back in her chair, trying to regain her professional composure while Cameron did the same. I've been trying to trace the source of the original allegations, Kimberly said, grateful for the return to safer, more technical ground. Whoever set this up knew enough about both your company and my reputation to believe I'd find what they wanted me to find. Or they believed you'd find evidence to support their false claims, Cameron suggested. They may not have anticipated your level of thoroughness. Or your level of actual integrity. Kimberly closed her laptop, decision made. Mr. Cross, I think someone is planning a more comprehensive attack on your company's reputation. The false allegations about data collection were just the beginning. Cameron's expression grew serious. What makes you think that? The sophistication of the setup, the resources required to create convincing false documentation, the timing so close to your IPO announcement. Kimberly had spent days analyzing the patterns, and the picture they painted was troubling. This wasn't a random accusation. This was a targeted campaign designed to damage your credibility at the worst possible moment. And you're telling me this because... The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond professional courtesy. Kimberly found herself meeting Cameron's gaze directly, seeing her own reflection in those intelligent green eyes. Because what I found in your systems tells me you're one of the good guys, she said simply. And because I don't like being manipulated any more than you do. Cameron was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and exhilarated simultaneously. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of decision. I'd like to hire you. I beg your pardon? Wilson Security Consulting. I want to hire you to help us identify and neutralize this threat. Cameron leaned forward, his business mind clearly engaged. You've already proven you can penetrate our systems. That makes you either our greatest asset or our most dangerous enemy. I'd prefer the former. Kimberly felt her heart skip several beats. Mr. Cross, I just told you that I illegally accessed your company's systems. Ms. Wilson, you just told me that someone is trying to destroy my company and you want to help me stop them. Cameron's smile was both charming and predatory. I'm more interested in your intentions than your methods. This could be a conflict of interest. I was hired to investigate you. By someone who lied to you about why. I'd say that contract is void. Cameron pulled out his phone. I'm going to have my assistant draw up a consulting agreement. Standard rates plus a bonus structure based on what you help us uncover. This is crazy, Kimberly protested, but she could feel her resistance weakening. The opportunity to work with Cameron, to see his systems from the inside, to help protect something genuinely worth protecting, it was everything she'd ever wanted professionally. This is business, Cameron corrected. Smart business. You're the person who found vulnerabilities in our security that my own team missed. That's exactly who I want on my side. As they walked back toward the conference center, Kimberly found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. Cameron moved with purposeful confidence, his long strides requiring her to hurry to keep pace. Conference attendees they passed offered respectful nods or attempted to catch his attention, but his focus remained fixed on their conversation. There's something else you should know, Kimberly said as they reached the building's entrance. The intrusion you detected last night? That was me. Cameron stopped so suddenly that she nearly collided with him. The beautiful virus? Heat flooded Kimberly's cheeks at the phrase. You called it that? The code you left behind was. Cameron seemed to struggle for words. I've never seen anything like it. Functional but artistic, efficient but elegant. It was like finding poetry hidden in our security protocols. I wanted to leave something that would get your attention without causing damage. A calling card that would intrigue rather than threaten. Kimberly met his gaze, seeing surprise and something deeper flickering in those green eyes. I needed you to know that someone had been there. Mission accomplished, Cameron said quietly. That code kept me awake all night. Good, Kimberly whispered, then immediately wondered where such bold words had come from. Cameron's smile in response was slow and devastating. Ms. Wilson, I have a feeling working with you is going to be very interesting. As they entered the conference center and prepared to return to their respective professional obligations, neither of them noticed the man in the unremarkable gray suit who had been photographing their coffee shop meeting from across the street. Rick Warren lowered his camera with a satisfied smile. The first phase of his plan was working perfectly. By the time Kimberly returned to her home office that evening, her mind was spinning with everything that had happened. In the space of a single day, she'd confronted one of the most powerful men in tech, discovered a conspiracy against his company, and accepted a consulting position that would put her directly in Cameron Cross's orbit on a daily basis. How did it go? Aisha called from the kitchen where she was preparing what smelled like her famous stress relief pasta. I'm not entirely sure, Kimberly admitted, sinking into her favorite chair and letting the events of the day wash over her. It was intense. Aisha appeared in the doorway holding 2 plates of steaming linguine. Define intense. On a scale of productive business meeting to sexual tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Somewhere around intellectual foreplay conducted in front of 1,000 witnesses, Kimberly said, accepting the pasta gratefully. Oh honey, you've got it bad. Aisha settled into the chair across from her, eyes bright with curiosity. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Kimberly found herself reliving every moment of her interactions with Cameron, from the charged Q&A session to the intimate conversation in the coffee shop. As she spoke, she could see Aisha's expression growing increasingly amused and concerned in equal measure. So let me get this straight, Aisha said when Kimberly finished her account. You challenged him publicly, admitted to hacking his systems, revealed a conspiracy against his company, and he responded by offering you a job? That's a very simplified version, but essentially yes. And during this entire interaction, you felt what exactly? Kimberly paused, trying to find words for the complex mix of emotions that Cameron had triggered. Like I was finally talking to someone who could keep up with me. Like I'd found a puzzle I actually wanted to solve. Like She trailed off, embarrassed by the direction of her thoughts. Like what? Like I'd met my match, Kimberly whispered. Aisha's knowing smile suggested she'd been waiting for exactly that admission. Kim, honey, you realize this is how it starts, right? The kind of connection that changes everything? It's not a connection. It's a professional consultation. That involves you working closely with a brilliant, gorgeous, powerful man who looks at you like you're the most fascinating puzzle he's ever encountered. Aisha's tone was gentle but pointed. Just promise me you'll be careful. Men like Cameron Cross don't end up with women like us by accident. Make sure he sees you as more than an interesting diversion. That night, as Kimberly lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Aisha's words echoed in her mind. Men like Cameron Cross, wealthy, powerful, accustomed to getting whatever they wanted, weren't exactly known for their lasting relationships with middle-class security consultants. But the way he'd looked at her during their conversation, the genuine respect in his voice when he discussed her work, the heat that had flared between them in unguarded moments. That hadn't felt like the behavior of someone looking for a diversion. It had felt like recognition. Like two minds finding their perfect match and wondering what to do with the discovery. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message, and Kimberly's heart jumped when she saw Cameron's name on the screen. Ms. Wilson, thank you for an illuminating day. I've had legal draw up a consulting agreement for your review. I'm hoping we can begin work as early as tomorrow. Also, I wanted you to know. That beautiful virus you left in our systems? I've been studying it all evening. Absolutely brilliant work. Looking forward to seeing what other surprises you have in store. Kimberly read the message 3 times, her pulse quickening with each pass. Professional words, but something in the tone suggested deeper currents running beneath the surface. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on something appropriately businesslike. Mr. Cross, I'll review the agreement tonight and have an answer for you in the morning. Thank you for trusting me with this opportunity. Looking forward to working together. Kimberly, she sent the message and immediately regretted its formal tone. But before she could spiral into overthinking, another message appeared. Please, call me Cameron. After today, I think we're past the formalities. Sleep well, Kimberly. The use of her first name sent warmth spreading through her chest, and she found herself smiling at her phone like a teenager with her first crush. Which was ridiculous, because she was a successful professional woman who didn't get flustered by attractive men, no matter how brilliant or charming they might be. Except Cameron Cross wasn't just attractive, brilliant, or charming. He was all 3 plus dangerous in ways she was only beginning to understand. And as she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with green eyes, elegant code, and the promise of tomorrow's complications. Chapter 3 The Cross Innovations building at 7 a.m. was a different beast entirely from the bustling hive of activity Kimberly had observed during regular business hours. Security guards nodded respectfully as she presented her new contractor credentials, while the elevator carried her smoothly to the executive floor where Cameron had promised to meet her for their first official working session. She'd spent most of the night reviewing the consulting agreement. Generous compensation, comprehensive legal protection, and access privileges that most employees could only dream of. More importantly, the contract positioned her as Cameron's direct consultant, reporting to him rather than through any intermediary departments. It was a level of trust that both thrilled and terrified her. "You're early," Cameron's voice carried warmth and approval as he appeared in the reception area outside his office suite. Like her, he'd apparently chosen to start their collaboration away from the curious eyes of regular employees. "I appreciate punctuality. I appreciate challenges," Kimberly replied, taking in his appearance with more attention than was strictly professional. Cameron in a business suit was impressive enough, but Cameron in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders was devastating. The casual attire made him seem more approachable while somehow emphasizing rather than diminishing his natural authority. "Good, because what I'm about to show you qualifies as both. Cameron gestured toward his office. Coffee first, though. Something tells me we're going to need the caffeine. Cameron's private office reflected his personality perfectly: clean lines, expensive materials, and technology seamlessly integrated into the design. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Silicon Valley, while multiple monitors could be activated with voice commands or gesture controls. But it was the smaller details that captured Kimberly's attention: actual books on the shelves between technical manuals, a chess set with pieces positioned mid-game, and photographs that suggested a life beyond corporate success. Impressive setup, she said, accepting the coffee he'd prepared using what appeared to be a professional-grade espresso machine built into the wall unit. I spend more time here than at home, Cameron admitted. It needs to be functional and comfortable. And intimidating, Kimberly added, noting how the entire space was designed to reinforce his position and authority. Cameron's smile suggested he appreciated her directness. That too. Though I'm hoping you'll find it more interesting than intimidating. We'll see. Kimberly settled into the chair across from his desk, laptop ready and mind focused. What exactly are we dealing with? Cameron activated his main display, and Kimberly found herself looking at a detailed security analysis that made her earlier concerns seem optimistic. Over the past month, Cross Innovations had experienced 17 different probing attacks, each one more sophisticated than the last. Someone wasn't just trying to damage the company's reputation, they were systematically testing every aspect of their defenses. The pattern suggests coordination, Cameron explained, highlighting commonalities between the attacks. Different entry points, different methodologies, but the same underlying signature in the code structure. Kimberly studied the data, her mind automatically analyzing patterns and possibilities. This isn't random hacktivism. This is corporate espionage at the highest level. My thoughts exactly. But here's what concerns me most. Cameron pulled up another screen showing attempted intrusions that had been blocked by their security systems. These attacks aren't trying to steal data or plant malware. They're mapping our entire network architecture. Reconnaissance for a larger assault, Kimberly murmured, feeling pieces of a puzzle beginning to click into place. Someone's planning something big. And they needed detailed intelligence to make it work. Cameron's expression was grim. The false allegations against our data practices, the sophisticated attacks on our systems, the timing so close to our IPO, this isn't coincidence. Kimberly felt excitement building as the scope of the challenge became clear. This wasn't just about debugging security protocols or patching vulnerabilities. This was about outwitting an adversary who had significant resources, technical expertise, and inside knowledge of how Cross Innovations operated. Where do we start? She asked. With this. Cameron handed her a secure tablet containing access credentials for Cross Innovations' most sensitive systems. I'm giving you complete access to our network. I want you to think like the attacker, find the vulnerabilities they're looking for, and help us close them before they can be exploited. Kimberly stared at the tablet, understanding the magnitude of what Cameron was offering. Most companies would never grant an outside consultant this level of access, especially someone who had admitted to previously infiltrating their systems. The trust he was placing in her was both professionally flattering and personally overwhelming. Cameron, she said quietly, using his first name for the first time. You barely know me. How can you be sure I won't abuse this access? Because of this. Cameron pulled up her code on his monitor, the elegant intrusion she'd used to get his attention. Anyone skilled enough to create something this sophisticated didn't need my permission to access our systems if they had malicious intent. You could have done significant damage during your investigation and chose not to. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The compliment sent warmth flooding through her chest, but it was the trust behind it that truly took her breath away. In her experience, powerful men protected their secrets jealously, sharing information only when absolutely necessary and never without extensive legal protection. Cameron was offering her unfettered access based purely on his assessment of her integrity. "I won't disappoint you," she promised. "I know you won't," Cameron replied, and the confidence in his voice made her want to live up to his expectations in ways that went far beyond professional success. For the next 6 hours, they worked in a collaboration that felt more natural than any professional partnership Kimberly had ever experienced. Cameron's understanding of his own systems was encyclopedic, but he approached problems with a creative flexibility that complemented her more intuitive methodology perfectly. When she suggested unorthodox solutions, he understood the logic immediately. When he explained complex technical concepts, she grasped the implications without lengthy explanations. "Try routing the authentication through the secondary protocol," Cameron suggested as they worked through a particularly stubborn vulnerability in the client access system. "That would work, but it creates a bottleneck during peak usage periods," Kimberly replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she tested alternative approaches. "What if we distributed the load across multiple authentication servers?" "Elegant," Cameron murmured, moving his chair closer to observe her work. "I hadn't considered that approach." His proximity sent awareness shooting through her nervous system, making it difficult to concentrate on the technical details. Cameron smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely him, warm, masculine, and utterly distracting. When he leaned over her shoulder to point out something on the screen, she could feel the heat radiating from his body and had to resist the urge to lean back against him. "This section here," he said, his voice closer to her ear than strictly necessary. "What if we implemented additional encryption at the transport layer?" "Good idea," Kimberly managed, acutely aware that turning her head would bring their faces dangerously close together. "But we'd need to optimize the decryption algorithms to avoid performance degradation." "Already thinking 3 steps ahead," Cameron said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I like that." By mid-afternoon, they'd identified and addressed 7 significant vulnerabilities, restructured the authentication protocols, and implemented additional monitoring systems that would alert them to future intrusion attempts. More importantly, they'd worked together with an ease and efficiency that felt almost telepathic. "We make a good team," Cameron observed as they reviewed the day's progress. "We do," Kimberly agreed, surprised by how natural their collaboration had felt. "Your systems are impressive, but they're even better with a fresh perspective on potential weaknesses." "And my perspective is better with someone who thinks differently than I do," Cameron replied. "You approach problems from angles I would never consider." The compliment was professional, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't only talking about cybersecurity. Kimberly found herself meeting his gaze, seeing her own reflection in those intelligent green eyes, wondering if he was feeling the same electricity that had been building between them all day. The moment was interrupted by Cameron's phone buzzing with an urgent message. As he read it, his expression darkened considerably. "What is it?" Kimberly asked, concern replacing the pleasant warmth that had been building between them. "We have a problem," Cameron said grimly. "Someone just attempted a major intrusion into our financial systems. And this time, they got through." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of intense focus, technical problem solving, and the kind of pressure that either destroyed working relationships or forged them into something unbreakable. The intrusion had been sophisticated beyond anything in Cameron's experience, a multi-vector attack that had exploited vulnerabilities his team hadn't even known existed. "Whoever did this has intimate knowledge of our systems," Lucas Turner reported as he joined Cameron and Kimberly in the secure conference room where they'd set up their command center. "This wasn't an outside attack. This was someone with inside access." Kimberly looked up from the forensic analysis she'd been conducting, her eyes bright with the intensity that came from solving complex puzzles under pressure. "Not necessarily. This level of intelligence could be gathered through the reconnaissance attacks we identified this morning, combined with social engineering and possibly compromised vendor systems." "But the timing," Lucas insisted. "The attack came less than 8 hours after Kimberly was granted system access." "That's suspicious." Cameron felt tension spike between his oldest friend and the woman who was rapidly becoming essential to his professional and personal life. Lucas. I'm just saying we should consider all possibilities, Lucas continued, his protective instincts clearly engaged. We don't know her well enough to rule out, we know enough. Cameron cut him off, his voice carrying an authority that made Lucas step back. Kimberly's been working beside me all day. She couldn't have orchestrated this attack. Unless it was automated, triggered by her access to our systems, Lucas pressed. Kimberly looked up from her computer, and Cameron could see hurt flashing in her dark eyes before professional composure took over. He's right to be suspicious, she said quietly. From a security standpoint, I'm the obvious suspect. You're not a suspect, Cameron said firmly. You're the person who's going to help us catch whoever did this. For the rest of the evening, they worked together to trace the attack, analyze the compromised data, and shore up the exploited vulnerabilities. Lucas eventually accepted that Kimberly's expertise was genuine and her assistance invaluable, though Cameron could sense his friend's continued skepticism about her long-term presence in their lives. By midnight, they'd successfully contained the breach, identified most of the compromised information, and implemented additional security measures that would prevent similar attacks in the future. More importantly, Kimberly had proven herself under the kind of pressure that revealed true character. I think that's all we can do tonight, Cameron said as they finished documenting their findings. Lucas, can you coordinate with the legal team on the disclosure requirements? Already on it, Lucas replied, gathering his materials. Kimberly, good work today. I apologize for my earlier suspicions. No apology necessary, Kimberly said graciously. Healthy paranoia is what keeps companies like this secure. After Lucas left, Cameron and Kimberly found themselves alone in his office as the city lights twinkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The adrenaline that had carried them through the crisis was beginning to fade, leaving behind exhaustion and something deeper, the satisfaction of facing a challenge together and emerging victorious. You didn't have to defend me to Lucas, Kimberly said as they gathered their things. Yes, I did, Cameron replied. He's my oldest friend, but he was wrong about you. He was being protective. I can respect that. You can, but I can't allow it. Cameron moved closer, and Kimberly found herself trapped between his intense gaze and the wall of windows behind her. I trust you, Kimberly. Completely. I need you to know that. The words hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond professional collaboration. Cameron's eyes dropped briefly to her lips before returning to meet her gaze, and Kimberly felt her breath catch at the heat she saw there. Cameron, she whispered, uncertain whether she was warning him away or inviting him closer. I know this is complicated, he said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. I know there are 100 reasons why we should keep this strictly professional. But? She prompted, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. But I've never met anyone like you, Cameron admitted. Someone who challenges me intellectually, matches me technically, and makes me want things I've spent years convincing myself I didn't need. Kimberly felt her carefully constructed professional boundaries crumbling under the intensity of his confession. What kinds of things? Partnership, Cameron said simply. Real partnership, with someone who sees me as more than just a successful businessman. Someone who understands that my mind is the most important thing about me, but still finds the rest worth wanting. The honesty in his voice was devastating, and Kimberly found herself responding before her rational mind could intervene. Cameron, you're brilliant, driven, passionate about your work and protective of the people you care about. Any woman would be lucky to. Her words were cut off by the warmth of his hands framing her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with a gentleness that contrasted beautifully with the intensity in his eyes. Not any woman, he said softly. You. The kiss that followed was everything Kimberly hadn't known she was hoping for, gentle but confident, testing but not demanding, full of promise rather than pressure. Cameron's lips were warm and soft against hers, moving with the same precision and care he brought to everything else in his life. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "This changes things," Kimberly whispered against his lips. "Everything," Cameron agreed, resting his forehead against hers. "Is that a problem?" Kimberly considered the question seriously, weighing professional considerations against the electricity that had been building between them for days. "It could be. But I've never wanted anything to change my life more than I want this," she admitted. Cameron's smile in response was both relieved and predatory. "Good. Because I have no intention of letting you walk away now that I've found you." As they finally left his office and made their way to the parking garage, neither of them noticed the security camera that had recorded their intimate conversation, or the man in the unremarkable gray suit who collected the footage with a satisfied smile. Rick Warren's plan was proceeding even better than he'd hoped. Have you ever been in a situation where the truth could destroy the best thing in your life? Share your thoughts on whether honesty is always worth the risk. Sometimes our community's wisdom helps illuminate these impossible choices. 3 weeks into their collaboration, Kimberly had established a routine that revolved entirely around Cross Innovations and the man who ran it. Her days began with coffee in Cameron's office as they reviewed overnight security reports, continued with intensive analysis of potential threats and vulnerabilities, and often ended with working dinners that stretched late into the evening. The professional partnership had exceeded both their expectations. Kimberly's outside perspective had identified dozens of potential security improvements, while Cameron's deep understanding of his own systems allowed them to implement solutions with unprecedented efficiency. More importantly, their personal relationship had developed with the same natural ease that characterized their work together. "You realize we've been spending more time together than most married couples," Aisha observed one evening as she brought dinner to Kimberly's home office. "When was the last time you went home before midnight?" "It's not about the hours," Kimberly protested, accepting the Thai takeout gratefully. "It's about the work. We're dealing with sophisticated threats that require constant attention." Aisha's skeptical tone suggested she wasn't buying the purely professional explanation. "And Cameron? How's he handling the long hours?" Kimberly felt heat rise to her cheeks at the mention of his name. Over the past 3 weeks, their relationship had deepened beyond professional collaboration into something she struggled to define. They'd shared countless meals, intimate conversations about their backgrounds and ambitions, and moments of connection that left her breathless and wanting more. "Cameron's dedicated to protecting his company," she said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Aisha settled into the chair across from her, eyes bright with curiosity. "Kim, honey, you're glowing in ways that have nothing to do with job satisfaction. What's really going on between you two?" Before Kimberly could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Cameron. The sight of his name on the screen sent the familiar flutter of anticipation through her chest, and she answered without hesitation. "We have a problem," Cameron's voice carried urgent tension. "Someone just tried to access our client database through the vendor portal we secured last week. Can you come in?" "On my way," Kimberly replied, already gathering her equipment. "At 10 o'clock at night?" Aisha asked as Kimberly prepared to leave. "Cybersecurity doesn't keep business hours," Kimberly said, but she couldn't deny the excitement that came from knowing she'd be spending the evening working closely with Cameron. "Just be careful," Aisha called as Kimberly headed for the door. "Men like Cameron Cross are used to getting what they want. Make sure you know what that is before you give it to him." The Cross Innovations building was nearly empty when Kimberly arrived, her footsteps echoing in the marble lobby as security guards nodded respectfully. The executive floor was dimly lit, with only Cameron's office showing signs of activity. She found him standing before his wall of monitors, green light casting shadows across his angular features as he analyzed the attempted intrusion. "How bad is it?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "Bad enough," Cameron replied, his attention focused on the scrolling data. They didn't get through, but they came closer than anyone has before. Look at this attack vector. For the next 2 hours, they worked in the intense collaboration that had become their signature, identifying how the attack had been structured, tracing its origins, and implementing additional safeguards. The work required them to share the same computer terminal frequently, bringing them into close physical proximity that made concentration increasingly difficult. Try routing the verification protocol through the secondary authentication server, Cameron suggested, leaning over Kimberly's shoulder to point at specific code on the screen. His proximity sent awareness shooting through her nervous system, making her acutely conscious of his warmth, his scent, the steady rhythm of his breathing. When she turned to respond to his suggestion, she found their faces inches apart, his green eyes dark with something that had nothing to do with cybersecurity. "Cameron," she whispered, her voice catching on his name. "I know," he said quietly, his hand moving to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "This isn't the time or place." "When is?" The question escaped before she could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she'd intended. Cameron's smile was soft and devastating. "When we're not dealing with corporate espionage and security breaches. When I can give you the attention you deserve instead of dividing my focus between you and whoever's trying to destroy my company." "And if that never happens?" Kimberly found herself asking. "If there's always another crisis, another threat, another reason to maintain professional boundaries?" Cameron was quiet for a long moment, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone as he considered her question. "Then I guess we'll have to decide what's more important, perfect timing or perfect people." The words hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Kimberly felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of his honesty, revealing feelings she'd been trying to deny for weeks. "I vote for perfect people," she whispered. Cameron's response was to kiss her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. Unlike their first tentative kiss weeks earlier, this was claiming, demanding, full of weeks of suppressed desire and growing emotional connection. Kimberly responded with equal intensity, her hands tangling in his dark hair as she pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily, hearts pounding in rhythm that seemed to echo through the quiet office. "This is definitely going to complicate things," Cameron said against her lips. "Everything worthwhile is complicated," Kimberly replied, surprised by her own boldness. "Is that your professional opinion?" "That's my personal opinion about you," she admitted, seeing surprise and something deeper flicker across his features. Cameron pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist as he rested his forehead against hers. "Kimberly Wilson, you are going to be the most beautiful disaster that ever happened to my carefully organized life." "Is that a complaint?" "That's a promise," Cameron said, and kissed her again with an intensity that made her forget all about cybersecurity, corporate espionage, and every rational reason why falling for her client was the worst possible idea she'd ever had. Chapter 4. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of intense work sessions, stolen moments, and the kind of connection that made everything else in Kimberly's life seem secondary. She'd moved beyond consulting for cross-innovations to becoming an integral part of Cameron's inner circle, her security expertise now essential to the company's daily operations. More importantly, her relationship with Cameron had evolved into something that defied easy categorization. They were colleagues who finished each other's sentences during board meetings, partners who could communicate complex technical concepts with a glance, and lovers who found passion in both professional collaboration and personal intimacy. "You know, people are talking," Lucas mentioned one morning as he joined Cameron and Kimberly for their daily security briefing. His tone was carefully neutral, but Kimberly could see concern in his eyes. "Let them talk," Cameron replied without looking up from the overnight incident reports. "Our personal relationship doesn't affect our professional judgment." "Doesn't it?" Lucas pressed. "Kim, you've been here 6 weeks. In that time, you've gained access to our most sensitive systems, restructured our security protocols, and become Cameron's closest advisor. That's a lot of trust to place in someone we still don't know everything about." Kimberly felt the familiar stab of guilt that had been plaguing her for weeks. Lucas wasn't wrong to be suspicious. There were aspects of her background and original investigation that Cameron still didn't know. But revealing the truth now would destroy the trust and intimacy they'd built, possibly forever. "Lucas, we've been through this," Cameron said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Kimberly has proven herself repeatedly. The threats we've neutralized, the vulnerabilities we've addressed, none of that would have been possible without her expertise." "I'm not questioning her technical abilities," Lucas clarified, his eyes meeting Kimberly's directly. "I'm questioning whether someone with her skills might have other motivations we haven't considered." The conversation was interrupted by Cameron's assistant announcing that Julia Cross had arrived for their scheduled meeting. Cameron's mother entered the conference room with the kind of commanding presence that made everyone automatically straighten their posture, her elegant business attire and sharp eyes taking in the scene with practiced assessment. "Mother, you remember Kimberly Wilson," Cameron said, rising to greet her. "Of course." Julia's smile was polite but cool as she shook Kimberly's hand. "Ms. Wilson, I understand you've become quite indispensable to our operations." The emphasis on indispensable carried undertones that made Kimberly's stomach tighten with apprehension. "Mrs. Cross, I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to cross-innovation security." "I'm sure you are." Julia settled into her chair with practiced grace, her attention shifting to Cameron. "Perhaps we could speak privately after this meeting? There are some board-level concerns I'd like to discuss." For the next hour, they reviewed security protocols, discussed upcoming system upgrades, and analyzed potential threats with the efficiency that had become their trademark. But Kimberly found herself distracted by Julia's penetrating gaze and the tension that seemed to radiate from Cameron whenever his mother looked in her direction. After Lucas and Kimberly left the conference room, Julia closed the door and fixed her son with a stare that had been intimidating corporate executives for decades. "She's lovely," Julia began, her tone deceptively casual. "Brilliant, accomplished, and clearly devoted to you. But there's something you should know about Ms. Wilson's background." Cameron felt his stomach drop. "What kind of something?" Julia opened her tablet and displayed a detailed background report that made Cameron's blood run cold. Bank records showing large payments from untraceable sources, communications with known corporate intelligence firms, and most damaging of all, evidence that Kimberly had been investigating cross-innovations for weeks before their first meeting. "This investigation was commissioned 6 weeks before the tech conference where you met," Julia explained, her voice gentle but implacable. "Someone paid her a significant sum to infiltrate our company and gather intelligence about our operations." Cameron stared at the evidence, feeling the foundation of his trust beginning to crack. "This could be fabricated." "It could be," Julia agreed. "But can you afford to assume it is?" "Cameron, I know you care about her. But you've built this company on the principle that trust must be earned and verified. Have you verified anything about Kimberly Wilson beyond what she's chosen to tell you?" The question hit Cameron like a physical blow, because the answer was no. He'd trusted Kimberly based on his assessment of her character, her technical skills, and the growing emotional connection between them. He'd never thought to dig deeper into her background or question her motives. "What are you suggesting I do?" he asked quietly. "I'm suggesting you be careful," Julia replied. "I'm suggesting you remember that people with hidden agendas often reveal their true selves at the worst possible moments. And I'm suggesting you consider whether your feelings for this woman might be clouding your judgment about her intentions." Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the secure conference room where she'd been working on the latest security protocols, Kimberly was having her own crisis of conscience. The weight of her deception had been growing heavier every day, made worse by the depth of her feelings for Cameron and the trust he'd placed in her. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number: "Time to deliver what you were paid for. Our patience isn't infinite." Kimberly stared at the message, her blood running cold as she realized her past had finally caught up with her. She'd been so focused on protecting Cameron from external threats that she'd forgotten about the people who'd originally hired her to investigate his company. "Everything all right?" Tina Smith's voice made her jump. The young intern had proven herself to be both brilliant and observant, often catching details that more experienced team members missed. "Fine," Kimberly replied, quickly deleting the message. "Just reviewing the latest threat assessment." But Tina's sharp eyes had already noticed Kimberly's distress. "Ms. Wilson, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really come to Cross Innovations?" Tina's question was direct and unexpected. "I mean, your reputation in the security community is incredible. You could work anywhere, for anyone. Why choose to consult for us?" Kimberly felt trapped between honesty and self-preservation. "Mr. Cross offered me an interesting challenge." "But you were investigating us before he offered you anything, weren't you?" Tina's voice was gentle but persistent. "I've been analyzing our security logs from before you officially joined us. There are intrusion signatures that match your coding style." The observation was so astute that Kimberly couldn't deny it. "You're very perceptive." "I'm also very loyal to this company and to Mr. Cross," Tina said quietly. "He's given me opportunities one never would have had anywhere else. So if someone is using him or trying to hurt Cross Innovations, I want to know about it." Before Kimberly could respond, her phone rang with a call from Cameron. His voice when she answered carried a coldness that made her stomach drop. "Kimberly, I need to see you in my office. Now." The walk to Cameron's office felt like the longest of Kimberly's life. She could sense from his tone that something had changed, that the careful balance they'd built between personal and professional was about to be shattered. When she entered his office, she found him standing with his back to her, staring out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Kimberly complied, her heart pounding as she waited for him to speak. When Cameron finally turned to face her, his expression was carefully controlled in a way that reminded her of their first meeting, professional, distant, guarded. "Is there anything you'd like to tell me about your background?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. The question confirmed her worst fears. Someone had told him about her original investigation, about the payments she'd received, about the lies she'd told by omission. "Cameron, I can explain, can you?" He moved closer, but instead of the warmth and intimacy she'd grown accustomed to, his proximity felt threatening. "Because I've just been shown evidence that you were hired to investigate my company weeks before we met. Evidence that suggests our entire relationship has been built on lies." Kimberly felt tears pricking her eyes, but she forced herself to meet his gaze directly. "The investigation was real. But my feelings for you are real too. How am I supposed to know the difference?" Cameron's voice carried a pain that cut through her heart like a blade. "How am I supposed to trust anything you've told me when you've been lying since the day we met?" "I wasn't lying," Kimberly protested desperately. "I was hired to investigate, yes. But what I found changed everything. Cameron, your company isn't what they told me it was. You aren't what they told me you were." "They?" Cameron's eyes sharpened with dangerous focus. "Who hired you, Kimberly?" "I don't know," she admitted. "The payments came through shell companies, encrypted communications. But whoever it was fed me false information about Cross Innovations, made me believe you were collecting user data unethically. And you believed them without verification?" The question was fair and devastating. "I had documentation that seemed credible. I had no reason to doubt, you had no reason to trust," Cameron cut her off. "You chose to believe allegations against my company rather than verifying them first. That tells me everything I need to know about your professional standards." "That's not fair," Kimberly said, finding her voice as anger began to replace desperation. "I did verify them. That's why I'm here, that's why I stayed. My investigation proved that everything I'd been told was false." "Your investigation that you conducted without my knowledge or consent," Cameron reminded her coldly. Your investigation that violated our systems and our trust. Yes, Kimberly admitted, lifting her chin defiantly. And that investigation is the reason I know you're one of the most ethical men I've ever met. It's the reason I know your company actually practices what it preaches. It's the reason I fell in love with you. The confession hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric. Cameron's expression flickered for a moment, revealing the pain and longing beneath his anger before his professional mask slipped back into place. Love, he repeated quietly. How convenient that you discovered these feelings after gaining access to my most sensitive systems. The accusation was like a slap, and Kimberly felt something vital break inside her chest. You think I'm running some kind of long-term con? You think I've been manipulating you for months? I don't know what to think, Cameron said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. 3 hours ago, I trusted you completely. Now I find out our entire relationship is based on lies you've been telling since the beginning. Not lies, Kimberly insisted. Omissions. And only because I was protecting you. From what? From whoever hired me in the first place. Kimberly pulled out her phone, showing him the threatening message she'd received. They're not done with cross-innovations. The investigation they hired me to conduct was just the beginning. Cameron studied the message, his expression unreadable. This could be fabricated. It could be, Kimberly acknowledged, throwing his mother's words back at him. But can you afford to assume it is? They stared at each other across the growing chasm of broken trust, both recognizing the impossible position they'd created. Kimberly's deception had poisoned the foundation of their relationship, but the threat to Cameron's company was real and immediate. I need time, Cameron said finally. I need space to figure out what's true and what isn't. Cameron, please, I need you to leave, he said quietly, and the words cut through her heart like shattered glass. I need you to go home and let me think about this without the complication of what I thought we had. Kimberly felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but she maintained her dignity as she gathered her belongings. For what it's worth, everything I told you about my feelings was true. Everything. I know, Cameron said softly, and for a moment his facade cracked to reveal the devastation underneath. That's what makes this so much worse. As Kimberly left his office for what might be the last time, neither of them noticed Tina Smith watching from the reception area, her young face set with determination. Someone was manipulating both of the people she'd come to respect and admire, and she intended to find out who. That evening, as Kimberly sat in her empty apartment staring at the security clearance badge that would no longer grant her access to cross-innovations, her phone rang with a call from Dr. Malik Wilson. Kimberly, sweetheart, her father's voice carried the warmth and wisdom that had guided her through every crisis in her life. Aisha called me. She's worried about you. I made a mistake, Daddy, Kimberly said, using the childhood name that came naturally in moments of pain. I fell in love with someone I was investigating, and now he thinks I've been manipulating him all along. Have you been? The question was direct and non-judgmental, exactly what she needed to hear. No. But I wasn't honest about why I approached him in the first place. And now that deception has destroyed everything we built together. Tell me about him, Dr. Wilson said gently. For the next hour, Kimberly found herself describing Cameron in detail. His brilliant mind, his ethical principles, his protective instincts, his capacity for trust that she'd violated. As she spoke, she could hear her father's assessment taking shape. He sounds like a good man who's been hurt before, Dr. Wilson finally said. Good men who've been hurt have strong protective instincts, especially when it comes to their hearts. But they also have strong moral compasses. If your feelings are genuine and your intentions are pure, he'll figure that out eventually. What if he doesn't? What if I've broken something that can't be fixed? Then you'll have learned something important about the cost of deception, even when it's motivated by good intentions, Dr. Wilson replied gently. But sweetheart, I know you. I know your heart. And I have faith that anyone intelligent enough to create the kind of code you describe is intelligent enough to recognize genuine love when he sees it. Meanwhile, across the city in his penthouse apartment, Cameron stood before the windows overlooking Silicon Valley, replaying every conversation he'd had with Kimberly, every moment of connection, every sign he might have missed. The evidence against her was compelling, but his heart insisted there was more to the story. His phone buzzed with a message from Lucas. Found something you need to see. Rick Warren has been asking questions about Kimberly Wilson for weeks. Think we need to dig deeper into who really hired her. Cameron stared at the message, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to click into place. Rick Warren, his former friend turned rival, the one person who had both the motive and resources to orchestrate the kind of sophisticated attack on cross-innovations they'd been dealing with. If Rick was behind Kimberly's original investigation, then she might be telling the truth about being manipulated just as much as Cameron had been. The thought brought both hope and fresh anger, hope that their relationship might not be built entirely on lies, and anger that someone had used an innocent woman to target his company. As storm clouds gathered outside his windows, Cameron made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would find out the truth about who hired Kimberly Wilson. And if Rick Warren was behind this manipulation, Cameron would make sure he regretted ever involving an innocent woman in his schemes. The war for cross-innovations was about to begin in earnest, and Cameron intended to win, not just for his company, but for the woman whose heart he might have broken based on false evidence. But first, he had to survive the revelation that would come tomorrow when Tina Smith presented him with evidence that the attacks on his company were just the beginning of Rick Warren's plan to destroy everything Cameron had built. And at the center of that plan was the brilliant, beautiful woman Cameron had just sent away, the woman who might be either his salvation or his destruction. The truth, when it finally emerged, would test both their hearts and their commitment to the ideals they claimed to serve. Because sometimes the most dangerous viruses aren't the ones that attack computer systems. They're the ones that attack everything you thought you knew about trust, love, and the people you've chosen to let into your most carefully guarded spaces. But in Silicon Valley, where disruption was a way of life and innovation meant constantly reimagining what was possible, even broken hearts could be debugged and restored to something stronger than they'd been before. The question was whether Cameron and Kimberly would have the courage to trust in that possibility when the final crisis arrived to test everything they'd built together. Storm clouds continued to gather outside Cameron's windows as he stood alone in his penthouse, unaware that 3 miles away, Kimberly was making a decision that would either save them both or destroy them forever. The beautiful virus that had infiltrated his heart was about to prove that love, like the most elegant code, could survive even the most devastating attacks, if the foundation was strong enough to rebuild upon. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything they thought they knew about truth, trust, and the price of authentic connection in a world built on carefully constructed facades. But tonight, two brilliant minds that had found their perfect match were learning the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes protecting the people you love means letting them go, even when everything inside you is screaming to hold on. The next morning would bring new challenges, fresh revelations, and the kind of crisis that would test whether their connection was strong enough to survive the weight of secrets, lies, and the manipulations of people who saw love as just another vulnerability to exploit. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Cameron Cross and Kimberly Wilson were discovering that the most sophisticated security systems in the world were useless against the one virus that mattered most. The human heart, in all its vulnerable, powerful, beautiful complexity. Chapter 5. The emergency call came at 4:47 a.m., dragging Cameron from the first decent sleep he'd managed since sending Kimberly away 3 days earlier. Lucas's voice carried the kind of urgency that made Cameron's blood run cold before he was fully awake. "Cameron, you need to get to the office now. We're under attack, the biggest, most coordinated assault we've ever seen. And it's not just us. They're targeting our clients, our vendors, our partners. Someone's trying to destroy the entire cross-innovations ecosystem." Cameron was dressed and driving toward the office before Lucas finished explaining the scope of the crisis. The roads were empty at this pre-dawn hour, but his mind was racing as he tried to process what he was hearing through his car's speakers. "How many systems are compromised?" he asked, taking the curves of Highway 101 faster than was strictly safe. "That's just it. None of them are actually compromised yet," Lucas replied, and Cameron could hear the confusion in his voice. "Whoever's doing this has the capabilities to breach our defenses, but they're holding back. It's like they're demonstrating their power without actually using it. They want something," Cameron realized, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. "This isn't about stealing data or causing damage. This is about leverage." When Cameron arrived at Cross Innovations, he found the building buzzing with activity despite the early hour. Emergency lighting bathed the normally pristine lobby in harsh white light, while security teams moved with practiced efficiency between floors. But it was the figure sitting in his office that stopped Cameron cold. Kimberly was there, her fingers flying across a laptop as she traced attack vectors and analyzed intrusion attempts with the focused intensity he recognized from their weeks of collaboration. She looked up when he entered, her dark eyes holding a mixture of determination and uncertainty that made his chest tighten with emotions he'd been trying to suppress. "I know you told me to stay away," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion evident in her features. "But Lucas called me when the attack started. Your security team is brilliant, but they need someone with my specific expertise to understand what's really happening here." Cameron felt his anger and hurt warring with relief at seeing her again, at having her brilliant mind available to help protect everything he'd built. "Kimberly. Please," she interrupted, her eyes pleading with him to listen. "Let me help you get through this crisis. Then, if you want me gone forever, I'll go. But right now, Cross Innovations needs every advantage it can get." Before Cameron could respond, Lucas burst into the office carrying a tablet and wearing the kind of expression that meant very bad news. "We've identified the source," Lucas announced, then paused when he noticed Kimberly's presence. "Should we discuss this privately?" "She stays," Cameron decided, surprising himself with the quickness of his response. "What did you find?" Lucas hesitated for a moment, then displayed his findings on the main screen. "The attacks are originating from Warren Tech Solutions. All of them. Rick Warren isn't just trying to steal our clients, he's trying to destroy our entire company." The revelation hit Cameron like a physical blow. Rick Warren had been his closest friend in college, his partner in their first startup, the best man at the wedding Cameron had never had. Their friendship had ended badly when Rick's jealousy and unethical business practices had forced Cameron to choose between his principles and their partnership. "There's more," Lucas continued grimly. "We found evidence that Rick has been planning this for months. The false allegations about data collection, the coordinated attacks on our systems, even." He glanced at Kimberly apologetically. "Even hiring Kimberly to investigate us. It was all part of a comprehensive plan to discredit Cross Innovations right before our IPO." Kimberly felt the blood drain from her face as the full scope of her manipulation became clear. "He used me as an unwitting weapon against you," she whispered, horror and anger warring in her voice. "Not unwitting," Cameron said quietly, his analytical mind processing the implications. "You figured out the truth. That's why you stayed, why you tried to protect us instead of completing your original mission." "But by then it was too late," Kimberly said, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "The damage to our relationship was already done." Lucas cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's something else you both need to see. Tina found this in our security logs." The screen filled with surveillance footage showing Rick Warren meeting with unknown associates, exchanging documents, and clearly planning something extensive. But it was the final clip that made Cameron's blood boil, Rick Warren watching Cameron and Kimberly leave the coffee shop after their first private conversation, his expression calculating and satisfied. "He's been monitoring our relationship from the beginning," Cameron realized, fury building in his chest. "He knew exactly how to use our feelings against us. The question is what he wants now," Kimberly said, forcing herself to focus on the immediate threat despite the emotional turmoil. These attacks could have been devastating, but they're not actually causing damage. He's making a point. As if summoned by her words, Cameron's secure phone rang with a call from an unknown number. He answered on speaker, expecting to hear Rick's voice. "Hello, Cameron," Rick Warren's familiar tone carried smug satisfaction. "I hope you're enjoying the demonstration of my capabilities." "What do you want, Rick?" Cameron asked, his voice deadly calm. "What I've always wanted, recognition that I'm every bit as brilliant as you are," Rick replied. "But since the market seems incapable of recognizing my genius on its own, I'm going to have to take what should have been mine all along." "Which is?" "Cross-innovations. Your client base. Your reputation. Your company." Rick's voice grew harder with each word. "You can transfer controlling interest to me voluntarily, or I can destroy everything you've built and pick up the pieces when you're finished." Cameron felt Kimberly's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture of support that sent warmth spreading through his chest despite the crisis they were facing. "And if I refuse?" Cameron asked. "Then you're lovely MS. Wilson gets to watch as I expose her to every law enforcement agency that might be interested in her illegal hacking activities," Rick said smoothly. "I have comprehensive documentation of her intrusion into your systems, her theft of proprietary information, her attempts to manipulate you through romantic involvement. She'll spend the next decade in federal prison." The threat against Kimberly sent rage flooding through Cameron's system, but it was her response that surprised him. Instead of fear, her expression showed cold determination. "Rick," Kimberly said, her voice carrying lethal calm. "This is Kimberly Wilson. I want you to know something before you continue with whatever plan you think you have." "Ms. Wilson, how lovely to finally speak directly," Rick replied, clearly enjoying himself. "I hope you appreciate the elegance of how I've used your own skills against the man you think you love." "What I appreciate," Kimberly said, her fingers flying across her laptop, "is that you've just made a critical error. By targeting Cross-Innovation's entire ecosystem simultaneously, you've revealed the full scope of your network infiltration. And by bragging about your capabilities, you've given me exactly what I need to trace back to your source systems." Cameron watched in fascination as Kimberly worked, her brilliant mind turning Rick's demonstration of power into a roadmap for counterattack. "You see, Rick," Kimberly continued, her voice growing more confident with each passing second, "while you were busy manipulating me and trying to destroy Cameron's company, I was learning every detail of Cross-Innovation's security architecture. And now I'm going to use that knowledge to protect the man I love from someone who clearly doesn't understand what real partnership looks like." "You're bluffing," Rick said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Kimberly's fingers paused over her keyboard. "Cameron, with your permission, I'd like to show Rick Warren what happens when someone threatens the people and things I care about." Cameron looked at the woman who had infiltrated his systems, his company, and his heart, seeing in her eyes the same fierce protectiveness that had driven him to build his empire in the first place. "Do it." What followed was the most elegant display of ethical hacking Cameron had ever witnessed. In less than 20 minutes, Kimberly traced Rick's attacks back to their sources, identified every system in his network, and compiled evidence of his illegal activities that would keep federal prosecutors busy for years. "Rick," she said sweetly into the phone, "you should probably check your own security systems right about now." The sound of frantic typing came through the phone speaker, followed by a string of curses that would have made tech support engineers blush. "How?" Rick began. "Did I penetrate your supposedly secure network?" Kimberly finished. "The same way I got into Cross-Innovation systems, except I'm not leaving elegant calling cards this time. I'm leaving evidence trails that lead directly to your door. Every illegal intrusion you've attempted, every piece of stolen data, every violation of federal cybersecurity laws, it's all documented now and ready for delivery to the appropriate authorities." "You can't prove." "I can prove everything," Kimberly interrupted. Including the payments you made to shell companies to hire me, the false documentation you created to support your allegations against Cross Innovations, and the conspiracy to commit corporate espionage that you've been orchestrating for months. Cameron felt admiration and something deeper flooding through him as he watched Kimberly systematically dismantle Rick's schemes. This was the woman who had fought for his company even when she thought she was investigating it for wrongdoing. This was the brilliant, principled, fierce protector he'd fallen in love with. "Rick," Cameron said into the phone, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just won a war, "you have 60 seconds to cease all attacks on Cross Innovations and our partners before we forward this evidence to the FBI. Your choice." The phone went dead, and within moments, the attacks on Cross Innovations systems stopped as abruptly as they had begun. "It's over," Lucas announced from his monitoring station. "All intrusion attempts have ceased. Network security is green across all systems." As the crisis response team began the process of documenting the attack and implementing additional safeguards, Cameron found himself alone with Kimberly in his office. The woman who had saved his company stood before the wall of windows, her silhouette outlined against the dawn light that was just beginning to paint the sky. "Thank you," he said quietly, moving to stand beside her. "Don't thank me," Kimberly replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm the reason you were vulnerable to Rick's manipulation in the first place. If I had been honest from the beginning. If you had been honest from the beginning, Rick would have found another way to attack us," Cameron interrupted. "And we wouldn't have had your expertise to defend against it." Kimberly turned to face him, tears shining in her dark eyes. "Cameron, I need you to know that everything I told you about my feelings was true. I fell in love with your mind first, through your code, through the elegance and ethics built into every system you created. And then I fell in love with the man who could create something so beautiful." "I know," Cameron said softly, his hand moving to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "I think I've known all along. That's what made this so difficult. My heart insisted you were genuine even when the evidence suggested otherwise. Can you forgive me?" She whispered, leaning into his touch. "There's nothing to forgive," Cameron replied, understanding flooding through him as the pieces finally fell into place. "You were manipulated just as much as I was. Rick counted on both of us reacting exactly as we did, me with suspicious anger, you with guilty secrecy. He nearly destroyed us by using our own protective instincts against us. But we're stronger than his algorithms," Kimberly said, hope beginning to shine through her tears. "We are," Cameron agreed, pulling her closer. "We're stronger because we're together. Because your mind complements mine, because your skills enhance rather than threaten my abilities, because what we've built together is more powerful than anything either of us could create alone." When Cameron kissed her this time, it was with the passion of someone who had almost lost everything and discovered what really mattered. Kimberly responded with equal intensity, her arms wrapping around him as she poured weeks of suppressed emotion into the connection that had survived manipulation, deception, and the kind of pressure that destroyed weaker bonds. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love your brilliant mind, your ethical principles, your protective instincts, and the way you trusted me even when logic said you shouldn't." "I love you too," Cameron replied, his forehead resting against hers. "I love your courage, your integrity, your willingness to fight for what's right even when it costs you personally. And I love the way you hacked my heart so completely that nothing else matters without you." As they stood together in the growing daylight, both understood that what they'd built together was stronger than the attacks of people who saw love as weakness rather than strength. Their partnership, professional and personal, had survived the ultimate test and emerged unbreakable. "So what happens now?" Kimberly asked, her voice soft with possibility. "Now we build something even better," Cameron said, his eyes bright with the kind of vision that had created his empire. "A company that not only protects data but demonstrates that ethical business practices and passionate partnerships can coexist. A relationship that proves two brilliant minds are infinitely more powerful when they're working together instead of in isolation." "And us?" she asked, hope and love shining in her dark eyes. "Us," Cameron said, pulling a small velvet box from his desk drawer, "We become partners in every sense of the word. Kimberly Wilson, will you marry me and help me debug every algorithm, secure every system, and build something beautiful together?" The proposal was as unexpected as it was perfect, practical, romantic, and full of promise for a future where their combined strengths would create something neither could accomplish alone. "Yes," Kimberly whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face as Cameron slipped the elegant ring onto her finger. "Yes to marriage, yes to partnership, yes to building something beautiful together." Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of applause from the doorway, where Lucas, Tina, and the rest of the security team had gathered to witness the moment that transformed a professional crisis into personal triumph. "About time," Julia Cross said, her elegant voice carrying warmth and approval as she joined the group. "I was beginning to think my son was too stubborn to recognize a perfect match when he found one." "Mother?" Cameron asked, surprised by her presence and her obvious approval. "I may have been overly protective," Julia admitted, her eyes moving between Cameron and Kimberly with maternal satisfaction. "But watching how Kimberly fought for our company and for you, even when she thought she'd lost you forever, tells me everything I need to know about her character. Welcome to the family, dear." 6 months later, Cross Innovations went public with the most successful IPO in tech history, led by CEO Cameron Cross and Chief Security Officer Kimberly Cross. Their partnership had not only revolutionized cybersecurity practices but had also demonstrated that love and business success could enhance rather than threaten each other. Rick Warren, meanwhile, was serving a 15-year sentence for corporate espionage, computer fraud, and conspiracy. His attempts to destroy Cross Innovations had ultimately made the company stronger and more secure than ever before. But it was the smaller moments that mattered most to Cameron and Kimberly, working late into the night on new security protocols, sharing coffee and ideas in the morning, building both a company and a marriage on the foundation of mutual respect, intellectual partnership, and the kind of love that made everything else possible. "You know," Kimberly said one evening as they reviewed code together in their home office, "when I first hacked into your systems, I never imagined I'd end up debugging your heart too." "And when I first discovered your beautiful virus," Cameron replied, pulling her close, "I never imagined it would be the key to unlocking everything I'd been protecting myself from." "Love," Kimberly murmured against his lips. "Partnership," Cameron agreed. "The most elegant code we'll ever write together." As they kissed in the soft glow of their monitors, two brilliant minds that had found their perfect match continued building something beautiful, a love story written in algorithms, debugged through trust, and executed with the kind of passion that proved some viruses were meant to infiltrate and transform rather than destroy. Their relationship had started with hacking, continued through crisis, and evolved into the kind of partnership that made both of them stronger, smarter, and more capable than they'd ever been alone. And that, they both agreed, was the most beautiful code of all, the program that ran on love, executed through trust, and created output that enriched not only their own lives but the entire world around them. Have you ever met someone who challenged your carefully constructed world? What happened when you chose trust over protection? Share your thoughts on finding that perfect partnership where two minds enhance rather than threaten each other. Sometimes the most powerful connections happen when we choose vulnerability over self-preservation.